We're going to talk a little bit about loneliness today. And last week we started out with this series talking about the weight of our words. We looked at the story of Nicodemus and Jesus and how the words that Jesus spoke to Nicodemus were hard for Nicodemus to understand, as they are for us, to be born again. And yet they were transformative. And so that was kind of what we talked about last week, the power of our words to shape our world. Today, I want to speak specifically to the power of our words to cure certain things, and one of those things today is loneliness. I want to really drill down in that our words alone can begin to put people on a path to healing from loneliness. If you look at the scientific literature out there right now on loneliness, in fact, Surgeon General a few years ago declared that loneliness is a health epidemic. Science is linking it further and further to cardiovascular disease, dementia, and depression. And according to some researchers, the effects of loneliness on our mentality is similar to smoking and worse than obesity. And so science is continuing to point to these negative effects of something that we haven't really taken that seriously most of our history. We've looked at loneliness and said, yeah, it's bad, and yeah, it can have negative effects, but we've kind of just, most of us relegate it to quite a low priority. And the reality is we're finding out that isolation, not only from a physical health standpoint, but spiritually can be devastating, mentally can be devastating. And we know that the whole idea behind church, this is a kind of a weird idea that we don't really do in Western culture and society, to come together to a place with a bunch of people that some you know, some you don't know that well, listen to a guy talk for 30 minutes. I mean, where else do you do that during the week? Nowhere, right? Where else do you come together specifically for community? And so Jesus, when he gave us this beautiful vision of the church, part of it was as a inoculation against loneliness. Now, you can certainly go to a church and act like it's a movie theater and not talk to anyone and run out right when it's over. But we do our best to put you in an environment where if you put a little bit of effort, just the mustard seed of effort into it, you will be able to develop relationship. You will be able to develop friendship. You will be able to see people that you can pray with and pray for and be prayed for. I read one study this week that really shocked me, but it said loneliness over a period of time can increase the risk of early death by as much as 30%. We said last week, we joked that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Today, what I want to look at is actually the omission of certain words can be worse than things we say sometimes. And that is this idea that our words are powerful. The weight of our words is hefty. And if we choose to encourage someone with our words or we choose to deny them with our words, that can mean a lot. That can be powerful. We left off, like I said last week, with Nicodemus. And he was this Jewish guy having trouble understanding the concept of being born again. And it was a very difficult thing for him to wrap his mind around. How can I be born again? And Jesus, of course, was not speaking of physical rebirth. He was speaking of spiritual rebirth. And that concept continues into our culture, that we struggle sometimes with understanding what it means to be born again. If I'm born into this world, how can I be born again? And Jesus was trying to explain that concept of how the Spirit comes to live in us and dwell in us. And the weight of the words that Jesus had for Nicodemus were huge because they changed his life forever. Just as those words Jesus spoke have continued throughout history to change people's lives for over 2,000 years. We're still talking about a guy that died over 2,000 years ago, and today his words are still changing lives. His death on the cross still changing lives. Remembering his death through the simple act of communion still changing lives today. And he invites us in this story today that we'll look at, this conversation that Jesus has with a guy named Zacchaeus, to grasp how Jesus is so masterful in his use of language. He's just a marvel with how he speaks. And it shocks people. I mean, if you look at different times Jesus speaks, You'll have people that are very high up in power, political power, that are kind of like shocked by what he says. You look at when Jesus was just 12 years old and he shocks the people in the synagogue. How could a child speak with such wisdom? Well, because he's a unique amalgamation of God and man in one. He's this combination. He's this different kind of thing that we've never experienced before on planet Earth. And so in that moment, we start to learn about how we can be more like God, how we can be more like Jesus. And that's what I want you to get out of this conversation is how could I use my words like Jesus? How could I imitate Christ with how he speaks to Zacchaeus? So Luke chapter 19 is where we're going to look today. And this story is not just an ancient story, just something from 2,000 years ago. It is also a blueprint for how we can treat other people. So I want you to see it through that lens today. So this is Jesus and Zacchaeus here. We're going to read through till verse 10. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. And there was a man there named Zacchaeus. And he was chief tax collector in the region. He had become very rich. This is why tax collectors were not, we don't like taxes today, but this is a whole different situation. You might joke about the government ripping you off or something today, but they were really ripping people off in this time frame. In fact, the tax collectors would take a certain percentage above what the government asked, and they would keep that for themselves. So they're filling their pockets literally with the money of the people that they're collecting from. And so he was tax collector, and he'd become very rich off this practice. And so people just hated tax collectors. He tried to get a look at Jesus, this Zacchaeus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus is going to pass that way. And when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Now, a lot of shocking things happening here that we don't initially pick up on just a simple read of this text, right? First thing, to know his name, big deal. Second thing, for Christ to call out to him specifically out of the crowd of all these people, Zacchaeus, this guy who'd gone to extra effort so that he could see Jesus. And the point of the story all of a sudden becomes not so much about how important it was that Zacchaeus see Jesus, but the flip of the story is that Jesus saw Zacchaeus. Not that Zacchaeus saw Jesus, but Jesus saw him and calls out his name. And so verse 6 says, once Zacchaeus heard this, I must come to your house today. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. Now, what we have to read between the lines of the story is tax collectors, not being well respected, were not commonly hosting people in their homes for meals. They were hated by their people, their contemporaries. So, he was excited, but look at the next verse, verse 7. But the people were displeased. Of course they were. Why is this Jesus, this healer, this teacher, this rabbi, this good man supposedly, why would he go to a tax collector's home? And why should Zacchaeus be host? He's gone to the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. Whoo! Not just this regular sinner like us, a notorious sinner. This dude's bad. All right. So, verse 8, meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if I have cheated people, which you have, if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. So he feels guilty. He feels a sense of judgment. He feels guilt for what he's done in the past. And not only does he feel bad, but he wants to take steps to remedy the situation. That's huge. That's real change. And Jesus responds. And this is where we wrap up here. Salvation has come to this home today, where he's at, Zacchaeus' home. For this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. Now, suffice it to say, the Pharisees and Sadducees didn't think they were lost. So when they would hear silly things like this happening, they would say, well, what is this? Why would he sit down with sinners? Why would Jesus? And Jesus is like, you aren't getting it. I'm here to seek and save the lost. I'm here for people just like this guy, Zacchaeus. Potentially one of the most interesting parts of this story is that he uses Zacchaeus' name, and he calls him out by name, meaning he notices who he is, and he cares about this person. He used his words to offer grace and extend an invitation to belong. You might have to boost me just a little bit. I can't even hear myself over the rain. This is rare for us. One day we had a really big thunderclap. If we get one of those, that could be exciting. Usually we have small pitter-patter, and I say it's people clapping, it's angels clapping, but this is more like, I don't know. This is louder. I'll speak up. How about that? Sound good? So, the idea that Jesus uses his name is very important and valuable. And the reason that that's important is Zacchaeus was not well liked. And he knew that. He knew he had traded his good name for financial blessing. And so for him to use that name is very important. There's power in using people's names. Imagine the impact on Zacchaeus when not only did he get a glimpse of this Jesus he wanted to see because he'd heard so much about him, but he himself was called out. And Jesus says, I'm going to have a meal with you at your home. It was a moment of recognition. And in that moment of recognition, Jesus validated his humanity. He evaluated that he loved him, that he cared about him, and that there was something more than what people saw of him that was important. We know names are important. We see a lot of that in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible. We see a lot of that in the New Testament. The names had meaning. Now today we don't do as much of that, right? Our names don't usually mean something to us anymore about our character or anything like that. But names historically have meant something valuable. In John 10:3, it says, the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And what we don't understand about that scripture in particular is that shepherds in that culture would commonly name their sheep and could say their name, like we do with our dogs or a cat maybe, and they come when we call their name, hey, come inside now, and they kind of recognize either something. I don't know if they know their name. I don't know how that works, but my dog seems to know its name, and Katie, come on inside. She comes running. But if I would say, Bob, come inside, she would just look at me like I was silly. And so shepherds were naming their sheep. And so when he said this, common shepherds would have understood his story here, that, the sheep do know when I call their name. They know who I am. They recognize my voice. They wouldn't go to someone else. And so we're taught here that Jesus is this shepherd and that we recognize his voice. We know him, and he knows us so much that he knows our name. And names are important. Because when someone remembers your name, you feel like they remember something about you. Now, I am historically, and you may be like me, I'm really good with faces and really bad with names. So if I use your name, know that I have worked on that a lot recently, all right? Know that I have been working on that because names just, I don't know, it's something about, like some people have the math brain and they can just do math, and that escapes me too. But other people are good with words. And my skill set is not in name recognition. So if I say your name, it's because I've been working on it. It's like I used to have flashcards. I don't do flashcards anymore. I thought that was a little much. But I do use all the tools available. I use social media. I use email lists. I use prayer lists. I have prayer lists to where I can remember people's names. And I pray for most of you by name on a weekly basis. And certainly if you tell me something you want me to be praying for, I have another special list of where I pray every day, so I have a daily prayer time. And but face is so easy. Like I'll see a face from someone 10 years I haven't seen and be like, hey, how are you doing? But then it's like Tiger or Sport, right? Because I'm like, I don't remember their first name, but I remember I should know them, and I know their face. And so I try to contextualize it and use all these clues and tools, but that's always been difficult for me. But think about it when someone remembers your name. You know that's important, right? Because you hear that and you're like, oh, they know me. What's challenging was when someone remembers your name and you can't remember their name. Oh, that's bad, isn't it? Isn't that an awkward social situation? Hey, Clark. And you're like, hey, you? I mean, what do you do? And then, eventually they kind of get a sense, you don't remember me, do you? And you're like, no, I do. Kind of, not really. Right? It's horrible. It's a horrible feeling. But Jesus here seems to know Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus doesn't appear, in the text at least, to have any sort of personal relationship with Jesus at this point, and yet Jesus calls him out by name. And do you see what that does to Zacchaeus? Changes his whole countenance. With excitement and with joy, he comes down out of that tree. We don't know if he jumps out of that tree or gets down out of that tree somehow, but he comes out of that tree, and he's filled with excitement and joy, the text says, because he's been called out by Jesus. I read a book a few years ago from Dale Carnegie. I love some of the things that he says. And one of the things he said that's pretty classic, you may have heard this before, that a person's name is to him or her the sweetest and most important sound in any language. And love him or hate him, I think Dale Carnegie actually really had a very valid point here, that there's something that goes along with hearing our name. And if you learn someone's name, it not only helps them, but it also helps you. It helps endear them to you. And that's why, where we have this program we're going through right now called Bless Your Neighbors. And we're talking about knowing your neighbors. And if you join this, we pay for it. It's completely free to you, but you'll get an email on any kind of schedule you want. I get a daily email, but you can get a weekly or whatever. We have an app and everything that goes with it. And we pay for the subscription. But basically, it emails you on whatever schedule you set up with neighbors' names that are around you. And I don't know about you, but I'm learning people's names in my neighborhood that I'd never heard of before. Like, we have a Facebook group in our neighborhood, but not everybody's on that. And so I'm learning, and it gives you, just based on USPS data, it gives you, here's 5 homes that are near you that you could pray for this week. And you click a button that says, I prayed for them if you pray for them. And then we record that, and we have thousands of prayers now across our community. It's really awesome. And I'll get it, I think mine comes at 9 a.m. every morning, and I get it, and I look at it, and sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I know them, and we've been together, or our kids played in this together, or I've seen them recently. But then sometimes it'll be people that have moved in the neighborhood that you don't know, and it's wild, because I'm like, wow, I've never heard of this name before. I don't know them at all, but that house is right around the corner from me. Or it'll be like, on my morning walk, I pass it every day, and I don't even know their name yet. And so I'm learning that. And I think that's important, because now, if I see them in public, and they say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm like, oh, wow, I've been praying for you a while. Like, I know your name. Like, how powerful the name can be, because not just to them, but to me, it endears me to them a bit, to know someone's name and to be able to pray for them and to care about them. And that's why it's important to get to know people's names. The men's and women's events that I mentioned earlier, part of the value in coming together and spending a little time outside of church time is that you can get to know people's names. You can get to know their heart. You can get to know what's maybe on their shoulders right now, what's weighing them down. And you can pray for them, or you can ask for prayer for something that's weighing you down. I think those are incredibly valuable moments that can't always happen on a Sunday morning, right? I mean, sometimes it can, but it's more rare often than not. Whereas if we take some time out of our schedule for an hour and just sit down with people, we can get to know them, get to hear their stories, get to know their names. And that's where some real powerful things can happen. My grandma had this thing, and many, I've shared this story with friends before, and I've heard it's not that uncommon, but she did this thing that we called roll call, where she would go through a list before she got to your name, because she had so many names floating around in her head. And so she would say, Donnie, Sammy, Chad, Clark. Like, she would go through other names before she got to your name sometimes, because she just had so many names. It wasn't that, and we never ever once assumed that it was because she didn't know our name or care about us, right? But it was because she had so many names that she was thinking about of people. And I wonder, if we were to think about how important names are, that we would get a sense of how we could leverage that to pray for people, to have them. I have found it valuable. I'm not a big journaler. I know we talk about that a lot, and some of you love to journal, some of you hate it. I'm kind of in the middle. I have a journal. I don't find it valuable to write my own thoughts down because I'm all over the place, like mentally a lot of the time. So I use an electronic notes app for that. But I do find it valuable to write who I'm praying for and what I'm praying about for them, because I find that visual reminder very powerful. And so, I can open that book up and go, okay, that's going on there, that's going on there. I love that ability to have that. And so maybe just writing some names down of people you're praying for would be powerful for you too. But at the end of the day, prayer and knowing names is really helpful to break barriers down. Our culture is really quick to label people. You're conservative, you're liberal, you're red, you're blue, you're a Christian, you're an atheist, you're in, you're out. Our culture is just obsessed with labels. It's nuts. Because do any labels ever really help? Does a label ever really even identify all the complexities within a person? I think it's so black and white thinking that it's just utterly ridiculous to put labels on other humans. And so it's a shortcut, it's lazy, it's easy, you can fundraise and get clicks online for it, but how helpful is that for the kingdom of God? Because I don't know about you, but even when I've met lost people, like people that are just against everything, that, they hear pastor and they roll their eyes at me, right? And just against everything that I stand for. But to label them as like, what? Unreachable? What? Outside of God's love? Isn't that silly and ridiculous? No, the entire object here is to be able to open dialogue so that I can help them move one tiny baby step out of that closer to the love of God that I've experienced, because I want that for them too. Labels are useless. And thinking that way just divides us. When if there's one thing that Jesus taught more than anything else, it's that he wanted us united. That division was dumb. Unity was the goal. So, in our culture that's just obsessed with this, you don't have to follow that pattern. You don't have to label people. You don't have to use the easy, quick way of judgment. In fact, in Matthew 7, it says, do not judge others. Jesus teaches, you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. Ouch. That hurts, doesn't it? All of a sudden, it puts in perspective how we should be using judgment, that we shouldn't use it as a weapon to hurt others. I love what Mother Teresa said one time. She said, if you judge people, you have no time to love them. You could argue that you do have a little time to love and a little time to judge, but I think what she's really saying is, why waste any time in judging people? Why not leverage all the time you have, all the breath you have, all the moments that you have until you expire, until your life here on this planet is over, on loving others? Why not leverage what you have for good? Why not do good to those that are far away? Jesus did something here with Zacchaeus that really doesn't stand out to us when we read the story, I think, in the Bible, because we are such a different audience than the original intended audience of this story. Jesus was reaching across social and cultural barriers and boundaries with Zacchaeus. He didn't allow those prejudices that all of culture had against tax collectors to slow him down or stop him in the least. Instead, he reached out. And so if you were to reflect on that and use this as a blueprint for your own life, you would have to answer the question, who are the Zacchaeus-like people in my life? Who are the people that are the untouchables? Who are the people that are unreachable? Who are the people that no one else likes at work, in my neighborhood, in my school, at the cafeteria level? Who is it that other people avoid because we've all judged them, we've all labeled them, we've all put some sort of label on them? And how could I, even if I have a different opinion than them, even if I know politically we're on different ends of the spectrum, even if I know that I don't, goodness, I don't know if I should go there. Even if they are a Tennessee fan. That was heavy. We got through it. We love you, Scott. We love you, Scott. Screen's still on. Okay, good. Isn't that silly, though? How wrapped up and excited we get about football and stuff, and then how quickly we'll judge people that we could make a serious impact for Jesus, that we could love, and without maybe saying a word to them, not try to teach them that we're Christians, but just show them. What would it look like to love someone that's unlovable like Zacchaeus was, like Jesus loved him? Call him out. I'm going to your house. It was such a great honor for Zacchaeus to host Christ in his house. So many others he could have gone to that were, in our opinion, worthy or deserving, and yet he chooses Zacchaeus. What if you, instead of attacking people this week, started attacking the barriers between you and others? You took on as a project, a personal project of prayer and of action, the barriers that separate you from other people. It could be a family member. It could be a neighbor. It could be a coworker. It could be a classmate. Someone that you're just like, I don't want to talk to them. We're different. Yeah, that's our world. We're all different from one another in our own ways. But what would it look like for you to attack that barrier? Reach out to someone you normally wouldn't interact with. And I'm not saying go all super spiritual. I'm just saying open a conversation, learn their name, learn their story, ask a question or two and hear where they're coming from, hear their heart, hear what's weighing heavy on them. Because I guarantee you, every single person that you have labeled, every single person that you have accepted the label maybe of the community you're in has something weighing on them and is a creation of God and is worthy of being heard and is worthy of being prayed for and cared about. I'll do one quick plug one more time. In a couple weeks, we're going to have this conversation. How should Christians approach politics? We're going to talk on Tuesday, October the 8th, about what it means to be kingdom citizens. And so I invite you to be a part of that coming up very quickly. It'll be at night. We'll have coffee and snacks, and we're just going to sit down for about an hour and a half and talk and have a conversation. So it's not teaching as much as conversational. And it's the first one of those that we're doing this year. We'll do politics in October, so a month before the big election coming up. In November, we'll focus on prayer and how you can, it's kind of a prayer school. And then in December, we're going to talk about grief around the holidays. So those are the three big topics for this fall in these hour and a half long meetings that we'll have. So I encourage you to come and be a part of that. I did some research that is not scientific as much as it is just survey work that's been done by sociologists. And sociologists report that 1 in 3 Americans has reported feeling lonely at least once a week. And that's crazy to me because we are so connected and over-connected in our world. We have all these technological connections. Some of you are talking online to classmates that you haven't seen in 30 years. And we're all sharing these things in our lives, and we're reading these things in our lives. And so in a world that is more connected than it's ever been, how is loneliness this growing epidemic? And maybe we have to think about for a minute that is accelerating that some of those things have accelerated this feeling of loneliness. Jesus' invitation to Zacchaeus was not really about sustenance for food, right? It wasn't a meal to get full, fill his belly. It was about offering companionship. It was about belonging. So again, your challenge this week, reach out to someone who might be feeling lonely. Look around you. Maybe there's a seat open next to you. Maybe you could pray for that seat about who could come and sit by you. Who could get a simple invitation from you this week that they're welcome here. that they could go to lunch with you, have coffee with you, that you'll know their name. What would it look like to take that next step? Because if the statistics are right, well, we all know 3 people, and one of them is experiencing loneliness. Now, if you're experiencing loneliness, like I said, you're in a great environment for that. You're in the solution. Jesus gave us we could have had academic faith, couldn't we? We could have had, okay, you've received this book, just read it, go in the mountains by yourself and read it, cowboy. Go Lone Ranger it. We could have been given a faith like that, but instead Jesus said, no, the church is where we're going to come together. And this is the gift, the gathering of the saints. This is important. The Lord's Supper is important. These are all communal activities that we've been drawn together. He could have done the faith any way he wanted, but he instituted the church for a reason and a purpose. And a big part of that is that we wouldn't be alone. So you've been put into an environment like that. You do have one extra step. You've got to take that extra step, which is to open up, talk, learn someone's name, pray for someone, be prayed for. But it's all here for you. The environment is here. It's ripe. It's ready. In our culture, one of the things I fear the most is that we are just so desperate for authentic connection. And your words, just like Jesus used words with Zacchaeus. Notice he did not shoot a laser bolt at him, right? He didn't shock him. He didn't heal him with a touch. He didn't perform a miracle, and yet something did happen miraculous in Zacchaeus' life, didn't it? Happened purely through the power of words. Zacchaeus, what if you were to imitate Christ in that way and to learn someone's name and to connect with them, to plant seeds of hope, to draw them closer to Jesus?